Hi, I'm Paul Nelson. I'm a Subud poet living in Seattle, Washington, on the edge of Lake Washington in the Duckquib watershed, which is what the Duwamish people called it here, the first people of this land. Um, the most recognizable of which is probably Chief Seattle or Siacht. And I'll be reading for Zoomuse on Friday, March 5th at 11 a.m. Pacific time. Now, that would be 2 p.m. New York time. And, well, you can do the math if you're not in one of those two places. Andrew Hall has asked me to read whatever I want to read. So I'll probably read from a new series called Flexible Mind. I'll probably read some American sentences, 17-syllable poems, and maybe even a couple of prose sonnets from Sonetos de Cascadia, which go into the lockdown and my treatment for prostate cancer. I'd love if there were a Q&A after. I'd love also to talk about my upcoming workshop, which is called A Sequence of Energies. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to present my work and for the beautiful sisterhood and brotherhood of Subud poets who support this series, and SICA International, and Emmanuel Williams, who conceived of it, and Andrew Hall, who makes it go.
Well, that's very generous of you, Paul. Very, very generous.
It's true.
What about the laddie hand? Like, how are you aware? Are you conscious of how doing laddie hand has changed or shaped your creative process, or anything like that you'd care to share?
Mm-hmm. Well, the similarities between Latihan and projective verse are uncanny. Charles Olson called projective verse a use of speech at its least careless and least logical. Now, if you've ever done Latihan, it doesn't seem to be a real logic to it, and yet there is. We know it. We know it. I mean, for example, going through Latihan, and you feel like you got to do this in Latihan, and you don't think about it. You just do it as you're moved to do it. And then maybe a week later, you realize, oh, I'm on the keyboard for 12 hours a day. Maybe my wrists are a little sore. But you don't think, I'm on the keyboard 8 hours a day. My wrists are sore. When I go into Latihan, I will do this. You just do whatever you're moved to do. So that is a way of tapping into the body's, and of course, the soul is the body. The body is the soul. McClure said the body is the soul. The intelligent body is what he said. So that helps to deepen one's connection to one's own intuition. And you can, if you do that 2 times a week for half an hour, you'll be in pretty good shape. If you can do it more, if you can carry it into your life, you'll be in excellent shape. And if you can live the Latihan, you'll find that your life is very much clicking, and that you don't need very much to be happy, that you can be happy most of the time. My 8-year-old daughter and my partner Bhakti Watts and I have this tradition where we say, do you have any roses or thorns? And a thorn might have been that jerk in traffic who was driving 8 miles an hour, and I told Bhakti a month or so ago, I don't have any more thorns. That jerk in traffic was reflecting my impatience. And so it was only reflecting back to me something about myself that wasn't noble. So I don't have any more thorns. And I think that the Latihan aids that process in happening. Experiences of gratitude so intense to have the kind of feeling of gratitude that I've had in the Latihan several times, and to realize that, and through having prostate cancer and through having chronic lymphocytic leukemia and having that be indolent, learning that gratitude is the foundation of joy. So if you're not having enough joy in your life, go back and make a list of things that you're grateful for, and start with breathing and see where you go from that. See how long you could go giving thanks for things that we most of the time take for granted. I knew I wanted to be in radio when I was 13, when I saw a guy at my high school campus and his record had the corner cut off of it. And I said, "Hey man, what happened to your record?" And he said, "Oh, that's what the record companies do when they give DJs free records." And I'm like, "Free records? That's a business for me." So I was beelining towards being a radio DJ and listening to the Progressive FM in Chicago, WXRT, which would play in a typical set a band like Weather Report, or going into Led Zeppelin, going into Bach, going into a comedy bit, then going into the Ramones, and then having a couple of public service announcements. So a very eclectic upbringing, which I think helped prepare me for a very eclectic taste in poetry and music and things of all kinds. So I give them a lot of credit. I started doing a syndicated public affairs radio show in 93 and got my first affiliate in 94. And I was up to 18 stations a week at a certain time through this nonprofit organization, which continues to this day. I was doing interviews on whole systems approaches to issues. My book, American Prophets, I have a copy here. Looks like this, probably better like this, right? and when I was doing the whole system stuff, people like Rupert Sheldrake and Gene Houston and Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi and Matthew Fox and Larry Dawsey and Rian Eisler, Barbara Marx Hubbard, some really, really brilliant people. But then interviewing the poets, it started occurring to me that the poets had the most juice. Those people too, Gene Houston, Rupert Sheldrake, they were on the same level as the poets, but it seemed to me that's where the real juice was. It was in poetry. And so I started going after that. And of course, being primed with that 1-2 punch of Allen Ginsberg and Michael McClure. And then, people like Ann Waldman and Wanda Coleman and Jerome Rothenberg and Ed Sanders and Eileen Miles and Joanne Kiger and Victor Hernandez Cruz and Jose Kozer and Nate Mackey and Brenda Hillman and so many brilliant people that radio kind of gave me an in to being able to meet. And then it was just a matter of me doing my homework and being able to deliver a product that put them in a good light, and I was able to accomplish that. And I can't believe I was connected to those people. It's just some divine providence. I definitely think I was guided to that even before I was open in Subud, and I think doing Latihan has only enhanced the ability to tune into my own guidance. And I interviewed Allen Ginsberg on June 12th, 1994, and it was life-changing. And then interviewing Michael McClure the next year was even more profoundly life-changing. And those two stories are really beautiful stories, and I don't tire of telling them, because those two people get more credit for turning me into, or blame for turning me into a poet, than anyone else.
Yeah. How do you prepare to interview Allen Ginsberg or Michael McClure? What did you do?
Well, you read the book, and in the back of the book, you write, oh, page 8, he said this about this, and page 12, he said this, and page 47, he said this, and page 62, he said this, and this would be a good poem to have him read. And then you go through, and then you create a document with an introduction. And at the top is, interview with Allen Ginsberg, June 12, 1994, Tacoma Mall Office Building, Suite 85, 4301 South Pine, Tacoma, Washington. And then you read the introduction. And when you read the introduction, he begins to get a setting of what I'm going to be after. And I'm giving the listeners, because it was done for radio, I'm giving the listeners a sense of that. In fact, that interviews in this book, I could just find the table of contents, go to page 93, and give you a sense of what I said on that day. Can it be 50 years since the founding of the so-called Beat Generation? That meeting between Allen Ginsberg, Jack Kerouac, and William S. Burroughs? Can it also be 38 years since the poem Howl was first published? At the age of 68, Allen Ginsberg is still writing poetry that inspires many and pisses off others. He's a member of the American Institute of Arts and Letters, a co-founder of the Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics at the Naropa Institute, the first accredited Buddhist college in the Western world. And he's in Seattle, touring to promote his new collection of poems entitled Cosmopolitan Greetings, published by HarperCollins. Allen Ginsberg, welcome to the program. And, I had him I had a pretty good rapport with him on the politics. I didn't really know much about poetry, but I was able to, at the end of the interview, I was able to say, well, why don't we end with Autumn Leaves? He said, you did read this book. And I said, I've been up all night. I told you that. And so he said, that's a good one to end on. And he read that. And I said, well, let's talk about it after, And I said, did you ever imagine when you were a young man writing those kind of, I'm an old man poem? And he said, well, yeah, I'd read William Carlos Williams' old man poems, and they prepared me for this. And he recited a William Carlos Williams poem called "The Act." There were the roses in the rain. Don't cut them. I said, they're so beautiful where they are. Ah, we were all beautiful once, she said, and she cut them and put them in my hand. And he did that. He did that by heart, which was amazing. I've got the Williams poem. I think I have the Williams poem in this book here. Hard to tell. But, of course, Williams is the link. He wrote the introduction to Howl, and William Carlos Williams did, to Allen Ginsberg's poem Howl. And here it is, page 96. See how right Alan and I got it. The Act. There were the roses in the rain. Don't cut them, I pleaded. They won't last, she said. But they're so beautiful where they are. Ah, we were all beautiful once, she said, and cut them and gave them to me in my hand.
Wow.
So he said, yeah, you really did read this book. And I got a sense, of the lineage of Williams to Ginsberg. And then, I like to consider myself part of that lineage. I'm not in their, I can't walk in their shoes, but I do write American Sentences every day. And here's where they first appeared, right there on that page, American Sentences. For example, he sets this one up, Tompkins Square, Lower East Side, New York. 4 skinheads stand in the streetlight rain chatting under an umbrella. Or there's another one. Well, and this is where they got his poem, his collection, the title for his collection of posthumous poems. Rainy night on Union Square, full moon. Want more poems? Wait till I'm dead. So they call one of his books Wait Till I'm Dead, and they published it after he died. And then there's another one. Oh, this one I like, November 1991 in New York. Put on my tie in a taxi, short of breath, rushing to meditate.
Can I ask you, Paul? Now, these American sentences, are these sentences that you see during your day, you're reading, that you say, oh, wow, that would make an American sentence?
Sometimes. The notion of found poetry is one such way to harvest an American sentence. Like there's one that I read. I've read so many times, and it never fails to get a response. And I just saw it on a bathroom wall, and I'm like, wait a second, I gotta write this down. And then the writing part of it, is putting it into a form of 17 syllables. So I wrote, and I put the last part of this in italics, so to say I didn't invent this, but it goes February 8th, 2002. Next to condom dispenser is written, this is the worst gum ever. And no one fails to get a kick out of that one. And there it is right on the page along with other ones. So yeah, some of them are found sentences, and some of them, like I said, some of them come from dreams. And most of the dream sentences, they really don't work as poems. But I'm doing it in part for me and to keep my hand in that sort of poetry state of mind. And it reminds me, when I looked at my pocket journals, I just finished harvesting the last of the 6 years between 2014 and 2020. And it's hard work going through our life and all this shit I went through, going to Puebla, Mexico, which was beautiful, going through a divorce, which was difficult, dealing with my now 8-year-old daughter through that divorce, having a new relationship start up. I mean, you go through your life 17 syllables a time, and several of these pocket journals, and I had to, that was my task, to go through them. So Bhakti and I thought it'd be a good excuse to go to San Juan Island for a couple of days and do the work there, and then harvest what you think are the best. And I've got to get them to my publisher, and I'm hoping for a fall release. and actual readings in person rather than Zoom, although probably Zoom ones as well. But it'd be nice to have a reading in person, a book launch at our all poetry bookstore here in Seattle, Open Books, one of three all poetry bookstores in the United States.
So let's go back to Allen Ginsberg. So that was, yeah, it would be. I mean, he's famous for God's sakes. I mean, going back to the '50s, and here you are in the '90s, actually getting to interview him, and he paid you the compliment. Boy, you actually read the book, because I'm
Well,
sure he was interviewed by lots of people who really hadn't read the book.
yeah, well, that's true. That's one thing that's important. And I made that mistake once. And after the interview, the guy said, "I really wish you would have read the whole book." And I never did it. I never did that again. I read and I prepared, and I interviewed a Muslim man, and I'm and after the interview, he said, I'm really grateful for the sacred way in which you prepared for the interview." And I thought, wow, I'm getting chills just thinking about that. Jamal Rahman, we're friends. I think I follow him on Instagram still. He's a local guy. And we talked about the Gulf War, and we talked about a Muslim perspective on war and the Gulf War. And it was beautiful to be able to be in that position to interview someone like that as the United States is getting ready to bomb Iraq for the first time, and then went and bombed them again after that. So yeah, so preparing is important, and Ginsberg knew I didn't know much about jazz. He'd say about poetry. He'd kind of say something and then look at me, see if there's any glimmer of recognition, and there really wasn't.
So you interviewed Ginsberg, and did you start to write poetry after that? Like,
It was right before that actually, and I started getting interested in poetry. I remember picking up a Carl Sandburg selected poems from Half Price Books. God, does Half Price Books still exist? I don't think it does. Carl Sandburg selected poems. This book here, Carl Sandburg, a Chicago guy. He's got Chicago poems in here, and my sister had moved out here. My sister Barb, she's since moved back to Chicago to be with my dad the last few years of his life, and now to be with my mom the last few years of her life. And I remember she worked for Muzak, the elevator music provider. I don't know if they still exist. They exist in one form or another, got eaten up by some corporate entity. And I read her this poem called Chicago. And by the end of it, we were both crying. And I realized part of the emotional power of poetry, and that feeling in Chicago, it's called the second city, New York's little step brother or whatever. Although I remember going to London one time and they said, "Oh, you're from Chicago. That's like New York without the neuroses." And I said, "Yeah, that's a good way of putting it." So I read her the poem Chicago, which he got some editing help or suggestions. He may have rejected them from Ezra Pound. And it was published in Poetry Magazine, where Ezra Pound was a huge presence. And it goes like this: Chicago, hog butcher for the world, tool maker, stacker of wheat, player with railroads and the nation's freight handler, stormy, husky, brawling, city of the big shoulders. They tell me you are wicked, and I believe them, for I have seen your painted women under the gas lamps luring the farm boys. And they tell me you are crooked, and I answer, yes, it is true. I have seen the gunman kill and go free to kill again. And they tell me you are brutal, and my reply is, on the faces of women and children, I have seen the marks of wanton hunger. And having answered so, I turn once more to those who sneer at this my city, and I give them back the sneer, and say to them, come and show me another city with lifted heads singing, so proud to be alive and coarse and strong and cunning, flinging magnetic curses amid the toil of piling job on job. Here is a tall, bold slugger set vivid against the little soft cities, fierce as a dog with tongue lapping for action, cunning as a savage pitted against the wilderness, bareheaded, shoveling, wrecking, planning, building, breaking, rebuilding. Under the smoke, dust all over his mouth, laughing with white teeth. Under the terrible burden of destiny, laughing as a young man laughs, laughing even as an ignorant fighter laughs who has never lost a battle, bragging and laughing that under his wrist is the pulse and under his ribs the heart of the people, laughing, laughing the stormy, husky, brawling laughter of youth, half naked, sweating, proud to be hog butcher, tool maker, stacker of wheat, player with railroads, and freight handler to the nation.
So you read that poem. So were you inspired to start writing poetry by reading that?
Yeah, that was part of it. The power that my sister and I felt in that moment, wanting to give my daughter Rebecca some background in literature that I didn't get. So there's another book back there called Six American Poets, and I would read to her from that. I would read her bedtime stories, and then after a while, I thought, I could read her one or two poems, and she'll be out, and I'll be off the hook here. So people like Langston Hughes and Emily Dickinson and Walt Whitman, William Carlos Williams, Wallace Stevens, and I didn't read much Robert Frost. He was in there, but I never really liked his work, so I didn't. I kind of skipped over the Frost.
So let's talk about Michael McClure, because after you, a year after you did Allen Ginsberg, you talked to Michael McClure. Did you know him before you? So it was a new guy. And in the 90s, he must have been, what, in his 60s by then, was he?
I interviewed him in October of 1995. He would have turned 63 on October 20th. And he was in town in Seattle to do a concert with Ray Manzarek, who was the keyboard player of The Doors. Michael was also the sort of the poetry mentor to Jim Morrison, who believed because he was a rock star, people wouldn't take his poetry seriously. But Morrison did have some poetry chops, and McClure recognized that. And so they were friends for a while. I remember telling Michael, giving him a taste of licorice root extract, black goopy thing that you take a quarter of a teaspoon and you put it in hot water and drink that, and it has antiviral properties. It's medicinal, and and I give him just a straight little taste of it. He's going, "Oh, that's intense. I think Morrison really would have liked that." So I interviewed Michael, and I prepared for him like I would prepare for anyone, and it was life changing. He taught me about projective verse, which is a method of spontaneous composition that Charles Olson put forth in 1950. After the interview, he said, "If you like what I do, it's because you like projective verse. Go get that essay, read it out loud." And because he tried to write it in a pedantic kind of style like Ezra Pound, but if you read it aloud, it'll make more sense. And I went to the radio station and I recorded myself reading it on the overnight shift. I'd go play a record, and during the record, I'd read a paragraph or two, put it on pause, come back in, put the next record on, go back. And I think it took me 2 shifts to get the whole thing done. And then I listened to it. It was on cassette at the time. And listened to it over and 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 over. And I internalized it on some level. And it's been life changing. I still teach it in workshops. And I think it's a cosmology. And I think it's very similar to Latihan. A received poem and a received or guided life are very, very similar. In fact, that led me to teach a workshop called Poetics as Cosmology. But anyway, McClure read from this poem, Dolphin Skull, and I had never heard anything like that. I'm reading Carl Sandburg, and my poetry was a cross of Carl Sandburg and Frank Zappa, you know, Zappa lyrics like, "All we got here is American made. It's a little bit cheesy, but it's nicely displayed," stuff like that. And then I read this McClure, and it's like there's still nothing. There's still nothing that compares to having that experience of reading Dolphin Skull. And when I got the book, I looked at it, I thought, oh, he played with Ray Manzarek, beat guy. Yeah, I think I'm going to interview this guy. And so I told Penguin Books I'd interview him. We had it all set up. I went into the woods to do backpacking in Olympic National Park. And I can show you a couple of pictures so you can see the scene. It's just magnificent. Old growth forest, 400 or 500-year-old trees. And I went with that African guy I was telling you about, Eze, and 2 meat-eating white guy friends from Chicago who were happy to see a Denny's in my neighborhood. And we hiked up to the top of Appleton Pass, and I said, "Now tomorrow we'll go." And they're like, "No way, we're staying here. We're not going any more." And so the next day, we all went on our separate ways and had a day alone before we were to do ritual that night. And I hiked up about another 300 feet to this mountain. I forget the name of the mountain, but it's right there by Appleton Pass. And I was reading McClure's book, Dolphin Skull, and his typography is very unusual. It's very striking, original, and this this is the original copy. You can see it's kind of beat up a little bit, and that's a picture of him as a young man, Henry Reddle, who I believe ended up in Canada in Vancouver. And there's this one line where you see the words going down the page, one capitalized word double spaced after another down the very middle of the page. And as I saw this, I looked up at the scene where I was, and we had seen bears on the way up, and my friend Jim is like, or Jim or his friend Dan, I'm like, "Well, blow the whistle. You see a bear, blow the whistle." He's like, "You blow the whistle." Very scared for seeing bears. And, bears want nothing to do with humans. They can smell our stink from probably 2 miles away because of all the cheese we eat, And bears didn't bother us. But then looking back down over this tremendously pristine watershed, Boulder Creek watershed, and I saw these lines, and it hit me. I think I know what he's talking about. And the stanza goes like this, and he starts with part of the image from the previous stanza, and then starts on from that, which is a technique he got from Kerouac. But it starts out, gray hair on the floor and the radio talking, steering wheel, more real than anything else, foggy yellow lights in the tunnel, skinny, addled, wrinkled, childlike, old Horovitz playing Scriabin on TV, me playing this beautiful pen, more alive than I ought to be. More alive than I ought to be. Oceans and freeways of grief and guilt, triumphs of bare feet and drugs up the nose, child of cocaine and raccoons in hollow logs, fusus cryptestae filet. Nature loves to hide herself in Leonardo's secret language and the dimensions that disappeared after the bang. Old men dreaming of great-grandfathers are very wise, like sow bugs, or wooden spools wound with scarlet thread, or an antlered buck that drinks from a bowl in the yard in moon shadows. So when it gets to the part, more alive than I ought to be, I thought to myself, I think I know what he's talking about. Being in that pristine, old-growth watershed here in the corner of this country where 93% of it has been chopped down and sold and turned into shit. And here I am in the part that hasn't been turned by human beings seeking profit, turning it into shit. That's what the product is of this culture in North America is garbage. You look at the yards of the abandoned cars that sit out there for 30 years, or the wash machines. Those are the durable goods of this culture. And here I was reading this McClure, being touched as deeply as anyone could ever be touched by a poem, and have it transform the direction of one's life. And that is an incredibly rare gift to be able to have. And there was something, I guess I read when the book first came out and I first read it, and he talks about it in the afterword. There's an afterword, and he said, "It is understandable to all of us when we use our passions and our energies as acts. Compared to Blake, this is a modest poem, and it has filled me with the riches of sense and space that are always there. Perhaps it will please someone else, and they may appropriate it for their own consciousness. And that's what I did. I appropriated it for my own consciousness, and I taught myself about a way of composition that is also a way of soul building. And Michael is the main person to thank. But he's one of several who've touched my life and I've had the good fortune to connect with.
That's a very powerful experience you're describing, Paul. My gosh, what a blessing, truly. Now, did you meet McClure after you read that poem?
Yeah, I read the poem. I read the book. I prepared for the interview. The interview is in this book too, American Prophets, and then we developed a friendship. I memorized large swaths of that poem, as you could tell by me not looking at the book while I'm reading it, Michael signed one of the copies of that book, 3 poems, for Paul Nelson, who knows this poem better than I do. I read the whole thing too on his what would have been his 88th birthday, and it's on YouTube. You can see it on my channel, Splabman channel. You put in Splabman on YouTube, and they say, "Didn't you mean Splatman?" And you say, "No, I meant Splabman." So I got about 34 views. Splatman has zillions. It's more fun to watch someone be splatted than it is to hear someone recite Dolphin Skull, which has 48 views or whatever it is,
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible. So, yeah, very powerful. Do you have any poems from that stage in your life when you were just starting that you still are proud to read?
Yeah, one from 99. 99 was a couple of years after my first separation, and we would be divorced. I think we were still legally married. God, I think I could do it by heart. 99 lives and only 3 a.m. can slow it down. Or ballads, blues, and barbiturates. Phone rings, doorbell, car horns blare in my dreams. Is this my price to pay for a lifetime of machine convenience? Colors are duller, scents miss the big flavor. And who has 16 seconds to see a full moon corona beaming through thin May clouds drifting? Softball, car wash, cell phone. Oh, I can't do it. I can't do it. It's called 99 Lives. Softball, car wash, cell phone deadlines, masked missed opportunities for noticing reality's simple beauty. A robin's call or a child's knowing smile. Emotional purgatory driven by urges and dead habits, not yet in rigor mortis. Must see TV, top hour news, crime, sports, and weather all together with a rundown of Fortune 500 fingers picking my pocket. A sleight of hand amuses my ego and makes colors even duller. Lung drugs and work can't pay the rent. No time to reflect or pay my respect. Only 3 a.m. slows down this runaway train. And I hear the refrain of wood frogs in gravel pit ponds of perfect natural chaos. Time slips through my fingers like hot sand on a runaway beach in a dream. Dreams are vacant and misty in this state. They clean the slate and escape into watered down synchronicity. Kissing your sister. Ancestors scream in my insides, but lines of communication are down for account of linear time eternity as body and soul get stuffed inside black body bags as an imposter runs away with my wife and child and potential. A scheming ego trick from a street smart ass farm boy nightmare. Higher doses. I need higher doses. As newspapers stack into tomorrow, my breathing is shallow. Doorbell rings with kid solicitors, and I would learn to hate myself. If only I had time to peek behind the one-dimensional blur. Societal reality pointing a gun at me, and thank you, but no, Dr. Kevorkian, I can't hear a click. I need another smoke to speed up my heart and calm me down. Bills stacking like bodies from a bad war have me cussing, inventing new ways to conjugate fuck, and driving like a fucking madman with a coffee mug, brain dent, hangover, and foaming rage. fears masquerade. One of these days, I'll slow down, learn Spanish, and run away to my garden of the soul to plant herbs and zinnias and learn how not to fear insects. 99 lives clicking down. Square breathing gets me right as I slow down on the overnight. And I'll give up without a fight if only someone will touch me. So there's a phrase in sports, a tie is like kissing your sister. And that's what that one reference is. And lung drugs, for me, went back to a habit that I had back in the day that I tried to self-medicate with, but I didn't find it effective. And I found it to be, I found it to be at odds with the real high one gets when they have clarity, which I get through Latihan and through my other practices.
I'm not a poet, but as I listen to you, I would say perform your poem, Paul. What strikes me, and I guess I could see that in the Carl Sandburg and what I know of Allen Ginsberg's poetry, is there's a cavalcade of imagery, and it's almost like a surreal landscape. Like there isn't the sort of continuity that I know I'm here, and if I turn the corner, I know what I'm going to see. I turn the corner, and it's completely different. We're in another dimension. Something has sort of fallen out, and it builds on this sort of, as I say, a rush of one image after another and it's the cumulative impact is well, it's not your ordinary life that's coming at you. Am I getting close? I would ask you, am I getting close to what you're doing and what the effect is on people or not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think, people, the thing about poetry is it makes people feel stupid because they don't think a lot of people think that there's some kind of universal meaning that they're supposed to glean from any particular poem. And the truth is that that's not true. The truth is that if there's a line or an image that just connects with you or makes you feel like, I thought I was the only one in the universe who had that experience, then the poem is successful on some level. And so I see it as, Charles Olson called it a high energy discharge. And so, how can one take the really intense moments of one's life or the intense feelings, intense perceptions, and put that into a form that the person who's hearing it or reading it can have some sense of the potency of the energy that propelled the writer to do it in the first place. And so, because of Alan and because of Michael, I've really seen how open form is a real powerful tool, but it also has a very low floor. If you don't do open form right, it's complete shit. So it's the hardest way to write, but it's also the most exciting. Each time you sit down to write, it's an experiment. And, to this day, there's a lot of stuff I write that, crumple it up and throw it away. But I would rather crumple it up and throw it away and let the impulse incubate longer and come out in a more cooked way in the moment. So it's a combination of whatever influences and your attention to the moment and your ability to, is it a rhythm? Pound talked about melopoeia, logopoeia, or phanopoeia. Melopoeia, the music in a poem, and I think there was a lot of music in that poem and a lot of rhythm. So those are parts of the melody or melody-like stuff in poetry. He talked about logopoeia, what ideas are being expressed. The idea in that poem, 99 Lives, that's being expressed is that my individuation was stuck, whether it be through habits or having not found Subud, which I would find 5 years after that poem. Why was my life stuck? Was I stuck in the nafsu? That's what a Subud person. In fact, it's what people have actually said to me. Solehin Tom helping me reconstruct my own personal house so that the noble human and the divine are above the animal, for instance. And there's the right alignment of those hierarchy of life forces. And Latihan restructures that, and the phanopouia is like what you mentioned. It's the casting of images. I mean, if you say, I had a really hard time, I was addicted to marijuana and I liked sex a lot, and that really didn't benefit me. Well, that's the truth, but it's not very artistic to say that. So how do you say these things in such a way that they not only communicate that, but they communicate something deeper, and they go to a place in oneself that's closer to the collective unconscious. McClure said in his book, Scratching the Beat Surface, the way to the universal is by means of the most intensely personal. So, how do we make it intense and personal? We don't do it with generalizations, we don't do it with abstractions. Allen, when I interviewed him on June 12th, 1994, he paraphrased William Blake. And his paraphrase, I think, is better than Blake's original quote, maybe because Allen speaks my language, um, you know, contemporary American English. And in paraphrasing Blake, he said, abstractions and generalizations are the plea of the hypocrite, knave, and scoundrel. And the thing is, what are you trying to hide by being abstract? And that's what he said. There's a soundbite on my website that's him giving that talk. I'll write a poem where I had a dream where I did something bad, or I had a dream where I outraged society, and you lose the quiddity, is what he said. You lose the essence of that powerful image. And so, give me a for instance. Show don't tell. Um, and many other ways of saying that, as he collected in a whole series of mind writing slogans, which I think is also in that Cosmopolitan Greetings, where he collected these little slogans designed to help people see how to get to the real depth in their work. Ordinary mind includes eternal perceptions. Observe what's vivid. Notice what you notice. Catch yourself thinking. Vividness is self selecting. If we don't show anyone, we're free to write anything. I also try to journal my dreams first thing in the morning. And I think dreams are a great source for poetry. They're certainly a great source for personal mythology, digging into one's personal myth. So, journaling my dreams and mining those for poems. Quite often, at the end of the day, I don't have an American sentence, a practice which I've been doing for over 20 years. I write a 17-syllable poem every day. I started January 1st, 2001, and put out a book a couple of years ago, and American sentence, one sentence every day, 14 years. But the second edition will be coming out this year, and we changed the 14 to a 20. And I even wrote, I'm going to include one from 2021 just to let people know I haven't stopped. And based on the kind of year that seems to be the universal feeling, my 17-syllable poem on that day in this pocket journal is 2020 was taken out to the alley and shot in the head, which I think is an appropriate action for such a difficult year, a year of what we call it in Subud, we would call it a definite detoxification.
I think there's that lovely Subud word, purification.
Purification, that's another word that comes to mind. So the poetry starts early with the journaling, and I still have about 10 and a half years of daily journaling to do. And then after that, I think I'll go to the Jose Kozer method, and that is writing a poem or two every day instead of journaling, because I think by 70, my memoir preparation probably will be complete. That's what my hope is. And I'll be able to just write poems for 10 years. And then in my 80s, write my memoir the first couple of years, and then garden in Spanish.
You mentioned at the start that as you're doing your interviews for your radio show, you were attracted to interviewing poets because you felt they had more juice, you called it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what did you mean by that?
That's a term that an Igbo friend of mine uh, used, Eze Anamalechi. He was a dibia in the tradition of the Igbo tribe, one of the three tribes of Nigeria: Igbo, Hausa, and Yoruba. Oddly enough, my grandmother on my mother's side picked up Yoruba and was an espiritista in a Afro-Cuban tradition of channeling for people. So I think the poem for me is like channeling. It's definitely like receiving. Um, I learned that when you're channeling indiscriminately, maybe, or less skillfully, that you're not always, sometimes you're connected to energies that are less benevolent than you would like. So I think having a Latihan practice is very helpful in making sure that what you are channeling is connected to divinity. But as I said, they have the juice. He had this voice like this. I had to explain to him the bumper sticker that fundamentalist Christians in this country had. In case of rapture, this car will be unmanned. I don't know if you remember that when they had those bumper stickers, because they would be beamed up to heaven because they're good Christians, and the rest of us would be here probably having a good time. I don't know. But I told this concept to Eze, and his response was, they are in for a big surprise. So the juice in his word, I think, was spiritual power. And I think that with that spiritual power comes a real humility, because we know that the source of spiritual power is not in us, but is connected to us. And it seemed to me that the poets were consistently the ones who were tapped in to some powerful energy force that I wanted to be more connected to. So that's what I think I would say today, what I would mean by the juice.